19 years. That's how long I've been investing in property in the buy-to-let game. I'm going to take you through the pros and cons of managing property yourself or having letting agents manage it for you. I've done both, so I'm talking from experience here. Let's go. When I started on my buy-to-let journey many years ago, I wanted to learn everything I could about letting and property management in depth. Now, of course, I also wanted to maximize my financial returns, so I opted to manage my first property myself. I mean, why pay someone else to interview a few people and draft a few documents, right? Well, obviously there's way more to it than just that, a crazy amount more. And there are changes happening all the time that can get in the way of your simple vision of providing someone a home in return for a rental payment. The first property I ever had on my buy-to-let journey was a flat next to a popular university campus, so I expected healthy rental demand and of course strong yields, as is the case with student accommodation throughout much of the UK. Fast forward to today, and that very property has been through various phases of being self-managed by me and managed by letting agents. And that's just one property. Other properties in my portfolio have been managed by several agents and self-managed by me as well. So I'm in a very good position to share my experiences of what it's like self-managing a property and then letting through agents, along with the pros and cons that I've experienced of each method. First, let's talk about managing a buy-to-let yourself directly. When you manage a property by yourself, you're on the hook for everything. Finding a tenant, pre-contract checks, paperwork and deposit collection, conducting check-in reports complete with an inventory schedule, regular inspection visits and reports, rent collection and chasing, issues during the tenancy such as maintenance, and checkout reports, and post-tenancy cleans, preparing your property for the next tenant. And these are just the headlines. Every topic I've just mentioned has several subtopics underneath it. For example, finding a tenant means writing a property advert, deciding on where to publicize that advert, taking photos, holding viewings, etc, etc. Or paperwork and deposit has collecting the deposit itself, securing it in the correct way, conducting right to rent checks, which comprises ID and other documentation checks, checking references and much more. Let me be clear, you can do this yourself. It sounds like a lot because it is a lot, but you can do this yourself even alongside a full-time job. I did this in this way for many years for multiple properties, but doing a good job of it does depend on a number of factors. The key questions you've got to consider are, do you have the time to do all this? Are you close to where your properties are? And are you willing to spend the time learning the ropes, making mistakes, dealing with those mistakes, but getting better all the time? For my first buy-to-let, I lived about 20 minutes drive away, so it was feasible for me to visit the property when I needed to conduct viewings, checks on the property, or other matters. Now, when you're looking for a tenant, of course, it can be more intensive for that period of time because you're likely to have to do multiple viewings before securing the tenant that you want to take on. I rented by room on my first buy-to-let for many years, given it's a student let, and so I found it very intense during the start of an academic year, but much less intense as the year progressed. So that was all about self-managing. Now there's the letting agent option. This is where you hire out a letting agent to do many of the things that I listed out earlier. You can ask a letting agent to source tenants for you, handle all the right to rent checks that you're legally obliged to do, handle all the paperwork, the credit checks, the check-in inventory reports, take care of deposit collection and lodging it in the right way. They can also collect rents for you, deal with delays in payments, or manage maintenance issues for you. They can arrange regular inspections for you, manage the checkout process, and clean after a tenancy is over. So as you can see, they can manage a lot if you want them to, but there's a reason that in some of those I listed, I mentioned they can. And this is because you can choose from a basket of things that you want your letting agent to do for you. Typically, there are three main setups. Number one, you can go for the tenant find option. So in this, your agent is tasked to source a tenant for you. They will handle all the advertising for you, the photos, the viewings, the tenant reference checks, the tenant credit check, signing of tenancy agreements, collecting the deposit and the first month's rent. After this, they will hand responsibility back over to you for managing that tenancy throughout its term. A lot of landlords like this option because they find that the hard part is the initial tenant find and the initial checks, and the rest is just rent collection and dealing with the odd issue. Now, of course, this isn't always the case, but having been in that position before, I know what a lot of you are probably thinking as landlords, so I understand where you're coming from. This tenant find option is also cheaper than the other two I'm about to show you. The agent will take their fee from that first month's rent that they've collected on your behalf, but there is no ongoing fee thereafter. Number two is normally known as tenant find and rent collection. This is usually only slightly more expensive than the first option, with the only difference being that rent collection and chasing of rent payments are done on your behalf on top of finding the tenant for you. In my experience, this isn't much more than the tenant find option with an administration bolt-on. All they're going to be really doing for you is sending a few emails or making a few phone calls when the rents are late. Other than that, they're simply collecting rent from the tenant and passing it on to you with their cut taken off. It's not an approach I've ever used, and I don't intend to in the future, as I find it of little value. Then there is number 3. Full management. This is where your letting agent is involved in every aspect of the tenancy from start to finish. This obviously costs the most because a lot is included within this option. Pretty much everything is included here. Sourcing tenants and all that's involved in that, all the tenant screening checks, the reference checks, the credit checks and the like, all the contract drafting, the tenancy agreement signing, the collection of the rent, the collection of the deposit, lodging it correctly, all of the maintenance issues that might come up during the period of a tenancy, and all the stuff at the end of a tenancy as well. Now, across all of these options, the fees vary wildly, and these depend on a number of things, like where your property is located, what the rental demand in that area is like, the type of tenant you're likely to be taking on, and the amount of rent actually being collected. Now, in my experience, almost all of these options will come with an initial setup fee, regardless of which option you choose. But the rate you get charged after that will be dependent on which option you've chosen. Now for the pros and cons, and then I'll tell you what I do with my entire portfolio at the moment. To my mind, there are 3 main pros to managing a buy-to-let property yourself. You get to meet the tenants yourself and potentially during reference checks, speak to their previous landlord directly. This will give you a great feeling of what your prospective tenant will be like for you. Any letting agent will probably do this as well, but it's your property, not theirs. And you always like to give your property care and attention in a way that no one else can. Depending on what your style is, you will also be able to give your tenants a more personal service. This can work wonders for you if you build a great rapport with a great tenant. I know many landlords who have had the same tenants in situ for many years, and they've developed a great landlord-tenant relationship. I know one landlord who has tenants in place that just carry out small repairs that are needed by the property themselves and then bill the landlord accordingly. This ensures for the tenants that their property fix is done to a high standard and to their satisfaction. Whilst for the landlord, they know their property is being taken care of. And in return, they keep their rents lower than the market rate for that particular tenant. So it can work out great all round. And of course, by self-managing, you save money on management fees. You can also save money by choosing your own tradespeople for issues that crop up during the period of a tenancy. And because you are managing that directly, this will mean that you get issues resolved to yours and your tenant's satisfaction. Aside from costs and direct tenant relationships, the other big pro of self-managing a buy-to-let yourself is the learning you get from the process of doing so. And this is particularly true if you're just starting out. These learnings can be invaluable for your future in buy-to-let. Now for the cons of self-management. Having a direct relationship with the tenant can have its advantages, but it also comes with risks. Tenants are people, and just like all types of people, they can come in the good shades and the not so good shades. I've had tenants in the past which have led to police incidents, where I've had to deal with eviction notices, rent and deposit disputes, damages, insurance and repairs. If you're managing all the paperwork and identity checks yourself, then you've got to be very careful about getting every part just right and not falling foul of the regulations. There are horror stories out there about landlords not serving simple paperwork when taking deposits off a tenant, and not serving that within the prescribed time period. And as a result of that, if anything ever goes to dispute, the courts can find on behalf of a tenant and charge a penalty of up to 3 times the size of that deposit onto the landlord. And whilst of course you save money in management fees, you will spend a lot more time managing your property. And if your property isn't right next door, then travel time and the cost for that travel and time will have to be factored in as well. When you market a property, if you're marketing in a very popular area, then you can sometimes get hundreds of applicants, and sifting through all those can be an often neglected time hog as well. Now, before we move on to the pros and cons of using letting agents, let me talk you through a few tips for those of you looking to self-manage your properties. Find a reliable set of tradespeople, gas engineers, electricians, plumbers and the like, and let them know that you've chosen them as your go-tos for your buy-to-let property. Empower tenants to direct these people themselves. Now, this very much depends on the type of tenant you have, but you can assure them that it is in their best interest to do so, as it can speed things up and lead to them getting resolutions to their satisfaction. Assure them that you will of course bear the costs of all this. I've also found it's always useful to have a home emergency cover on your buy-to-let properties. I often get this directly with my home insurance for these properties, as I found that is much more cost effective than getting a direct home emergency cover in place which charges you an ever increasing monthly fee for roughly the same service. And then once that cover's in place, I provide those home emergency details to my tenants so they can call on it directly should emergencies arise. Now the pros of using a letting agent. Firstly, a quick and easy one. The fees you pay to a letting agent are tax deductible. That means that this expense comes off any profits you make off your buy-to-let properties before you're liable to tax. Next, it can be really useful to have an independent party between yourself and the tenant. Next, keeping up with regulations can be time-consuming and tricky, but it's even worse than that. If you get something critical, even slightly wrong, you can become liable to the tenant for costs and penalties related to that non-compliance, as I explained earlier. Next, your letting agent will naturally hold a set of keys for you, which is extremely useful when arranging viewings, arranging tradespeople appointments, or inspections. Now on the flip side, the risks of using letting agents. Now whilst extremely helpful, letting agents are just that, agents. They are not the landlord. So if something doesn't get done that you as the landlord were supposed to get done, then you are still on the hook for that. You are still liable. Even if you can retrospectively claim from an agent for their negligence or from their insurance, this is neither easy nor guaranteed. So it's not just a case of hand everything over and then you're sorted forever. There's no abdication of accountability here. Remember, you are delegating, that's all. Letting agents are not all equal. Just like everything else, there are good ones and there are bad ones. I've come across bad ones, the ones that just act like email forwarding services. They simply refer to you for everything, and then you still have to be involved for everything to confirm that you are content with everything they're proposing as a solution, and of course, the costs for it. So it's good to find a good letting agent that does the stuff that you want them to do. When it comes to maintenance, that's another risk, because I've had some letting agents that charge way over the odds for simple issues and simple maintenance fixes. So not only are they charging you the management fees for managing your property, they are also charging you an admin fee or additional markups on the very issues that you are handing over the reins to them to manage. Now, just like on the self-management side, I've got a couple of letting agent tips for you. Make sure you do your research thoroughly before committing to a letting agent. Don't just speak to one agent before committing, speak to a number of them. See how they respond to basic questions. Try and call them at different times of the day so you can get a chance to speak to more than just one person in their office. Ask to speak to other landlords who use them for reference purposes. Ask questions out of the ordinary, like how do they ensure that your tenants will be treated fairly, and see how they respond to this. If you can, contact them in different ways, because not everyone that's good on the phone is good on email and vice versa. Try and visit their offices as well to put faces to names. And don't forget to check out review sites, even if it's just reviewing their Google Maps listing. This can give you a flavor of what people think of them, both tenants and landlords. I now have all of my properties managed by letting agents. Having had the experience of managing properties myself and having them managed by poor letting agents, when I find a good one, I hang on and I don't let them go. The ones I've found and currently use provide me with a great buffer between myself and the tenant and provide me with a professional, hassle-free experience. Yes, I spend more on management fees by doing this, but I do this consciously because I want to spend more time growing my income and my assets rather than spending time managing a property portfolio. This gives me personally a greater return on my time, but I believe I'm only able to do so with such confidence because of my early days in self-managing everything myself and gaining that experience and confidence in doing so. My current agents manage pretty much everything themselves and only reach out to me when they really need to. I found that their initial setup fees are roughly similar to other agents I've paid in the past, even the poor ones, but their full management charges are slightly higher than those I've previously tried. I won't say you get what you pay for, because I've paid even more before for a poorer service as well. Now, the service I get now is great, but this isn't just down to those letting agents being good. It's about expectation management on both sides. But just before I get into that, can I ask you to smash the like button if you're still here and like this video and got something from it? Thanks. I provide my letting agents with standing authority to authorize any work up to £150. No admin fees will be charged on replacement items or management matters. That's what the management fee is for. Anything under £150, they have the authority to proceed at their own discretion. Anything above £150, they have to come to me for authority to proceed. If any item needs replacing, they will need to get 3 quotes from retailers, with warranty and customer service from that retailer being paramount. If I'm unhappy with those 3 quotes, then I'll do some research myself, and if I find a better retailer that I want them to buy from, I'll hand that transaction over to them to conclude and to manage the logistics and installation. For some particular maintenance matters, like gas and plumbing or electricity, I have preferred tradespeople in place, And for those matters, those are the only tradespeople they are authorized to use. I also pass the home emergency insurance details over to my letting agents so they can hold them and use them as the need arises. I review this arrangement annually to ensure I'm getting good value for money, but this is more of a cursory glance than anything more intense. I'm not really sweating the pennies. Overall, if I'm getting a good service at a decent price and my tenants are happy, then that's the thing I'm interested in. I hope that's been helpful for you. I'd like to hear from you in the comments below on what you found most useful and if there are any tips that you'd like to share with us that I've missed out. If you like content like this on money, then don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you on the next one.